Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our top stories. Tariffs on dozens of countries have taken effect, including a huge 104% on Chinese goods. The moves have deepened a global trade war while shifting the global trading order. Meanwhile, the White House says that around 70 nations have called for a trade deal with the US. This comes as stocks once again slide in Asia, with oil prices also down 4%. Iran says it is ready to engage with the US on talks over a nuclear deal if America stops military threats. Iran's foreign minister says talks with a view to seal a deal could take place on Saturday. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says his forces have captured 2 Chinese nationals fighting for Russia's army. Ukraine Foreign Minister says this puts into question China's stance on peace. At least 79 people have died after a roof collapse in the Dominican Republic's capital of Santo Domingo. Hundreds of people were inside during a concert, as more than 115 people have also been injured. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres says that Gaza is a killing field and that civilians are in an endless death loop. His comments come as 6 UN agencies urge world leaders to act urgently on the humanitarian crisis. Delegates from the US and Russia will meet in Istanbul on Thursday, according to the US State Department. The talks will not involve discussion on Ukraine, political or security issues, the US has said. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has faced off with his election rival Peter Dutton in their first election debate. Cost of living dominated the discussions, along with Trump's tariffs ahead of a May the 3rd election. US President Donald Trump is forging ahead with massive tariffs on China, a bold escalation in a trade war that's rattling global markets. Starting today, Chinese goods face a staggering 104% tariff. That's after Beijing refused to lift its own tariffs on US goods. The White House says China wants to make a deal, but Trump insists they don't know how. Let's listen to White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt.
Look, I just spoke to the president about this, and he believes that China wants to make a deal with the United States. He believes China has to make a deal with the United States. It was a mistake for China to retaliate. The president, when America is punched, he punches back harder. That's why there will be 104% tariffs going into effect on China tonight at midnight. But the president believes that she and China want to make a deal. They just don't know how to get that started. And the president also wanted me to tell all of you that if China reaches out to make a deal, he'll be incredibly gracious, but he's going to do what's best for the American people.
Trump is betting these tariffs will bring back US manufacturing, but economists warn it could just raise prices for American families. Trump also accused Beijing of manipulating its currency and announced more tariffs are coming, including on pharmaceuticals. Let's listen in.
Right now, China's paying a 104% tariff. Think of it, 104%. Now, it sounds ridiculous, but they charged us for many items 100%, 125%. Many countries have. Or today it was announced that China is reducing its currency. Did you see that? Big, big. In other words, they're going to make up for it. They got every trick in the book. I'll tell you, they are great. You got to hand it to them. You got to hand it to them. They're manipulating their currency today as an offset against the tariffs. You're not supposed to do that. The game isn't supposed to be played that way. It makes it very hard for us. But in the end, it's not good because they have to buy oil. See, we don't need oil. We don't need oil and gas. We have more than any other country. They have to buy it. That's where it hurts them when they do that. It costs them twice as much.
Well, in another development, Trump has warned Taiwan's chip maker TSMC build in America or face taxes of up to 100 Let's listen in.
TSMC, I gave them no money. Great company, most powerful in the world, biggest chip company in the world. They're spending $200 billion in Arizona building one of the biggest plants in the world. And that's without money. All I did is say, if you don't build your plant here, you're going to pay a big tax, 25, maybe 50, maybe 75, maybe 100%.
Well, despite global backlash, Trump says other countries are begging for deals and he's standing firm. Well, joining us to discuss some of these developments is Arvind Mahajan, a savings professor of finance at the Texas A&M University, who's joining us from College Station in Texas. Thank you very much, Arvind, for being here. The first big one that we have to talk about, of course, is this 104% tariff that has now been imposed on China. It's now come into force. How do you expect that the global markets will react to this big implementation?
Well, the numbers are just too high. Clearly, it's a game of chicken. This is a very unusual situation. I think the President Trump, has a reason to shake up the international system because indeed many countries had been imposing tariffs on American goods. And indeed, the US has been running deficits for a very, very long period of time. Now, having said that, there are two aspects to it. One is that foreign goods are cheaper, and therefore Americans, as rational economic agents, will buy stuff which is cheaper and better quality, irrespective of where it is made. That's one aspect of it. And the other aspect of it is Americans, while you raise these nationalistic feelings about buy American, people buy stuff which is in their best interest, and as a capitalistic system, Americans indeed prefer to buy stuff which is cheaper. And that is one reason why our imports have been significantly high. It's a rational decision to buy stuff which is cheaper. Now, the flip side of that is to ask the question, why are the imports cheaper than the ones which are manufactured in the US? I think there's some really good reasons for that. One is that labor costs in the US are much higher, and in a globalized system, things should be made where they can be manufactured in the cheapest way. And one outcome of that has been that manufacturing has been shifted overseas. So all what has happened has been reasonable, rational, can be explained based upon economic theory. It is true that some countries, and in particular China, have been subsidizing their exports because for them, providing employment is being very critical, especially as they move from being a developing country to being a developed country. And indeed, the president is trying to undo some of those unlevel playing field advantages which some countries were utilizing, including China. And indeed, therefore, to start with, talking about tariffs and other countries reducing their tariffs against US was a very reasonable exercise. However, this game has gone beyond what one would think it would be, because now it seems the president believes that tariffs really are very desirable, not just from leveling the playing field, but as a device to generate resources for the United States. So
Yes.
where the issue right now stands is it is unclear from the viewpoint of most people as to whether tariffs are an end game or they are simply a device for negotiation.
Yes,
If they
Arvind,
are a device
sorry to
negotiation-
interrupt, Arvind. I want to build off that. And we've seen Donald Trump throughout his second term use tariffs as a negotiation tool, as you've just mentioned. Is there a risk here, though, that these negotiations are so strong and these tariffs are so unprecedented that the impact could see devastation for consumers in the United States?
Oh, absolutely. There's no question about it. Now, when you say that it seems that the president is utilizing these as a negotiating tool, that really is unclear, because the president, even when, I mean, this is not come as a surprise, during his first term, during the second term when he was running for an election, he talked about tariffs. I don't think people took him that seriously. But the issue of Smoot-Hawley bill, which introduced tariffs earlier part of last century, they were a device where they were an end in themselves, where they could generate resources where domestic taxes could be lowered because we were getting taxes from imports. So it is unclear, really, that the president meant these to be a negotiating tool. And the market still is trying to figure out whether tariffs are an end game or they are simply a device as a negotiating position. The third thing, which really confuses things even more, is the desire of the president to bring manufacturing back to the United States. And the only way you can bring manufacturing back to the United States is by imposing tariffs over an extended period of time. So, to cut through the chase, the fact of the matter is, right now, it is unclear what the end game of this administration is, if you may. And that is kind of where we stand. And that is where the market is. The market is in a flux because it does not know exactly what the president's intentions really are vis-a-vis these tariffs.
Yes, Arvind, you're going to be staying with us, but we are now joined by Andrew K.P. Leung, who is a Chinese strategist joining us from Hong Kong. Andrew, we have spoken about these 104% tariffs, the unprecedented tariffs that Donald Trump's administration has imposed on Chinese exports. I'd like to first get your reaction now to these tariffs and what you think the response from Beijing will be. Well, while we get our line fixed with Andrew there, I will throw this question to you, Arvind. Do you think that we will see a major response from China? We've heard nothing yet since this 104% tariff has come into force. But what can China do to counteract this, given that any move will likely further escalate this trade war?
Yeah, I think so. Everything which we've seen from China so far is that China does not want to back down. I think in some ways, China is the contender. It wants to be the challenger to the United States. And the sense I have got is that China does not want, even though there has been talk about negotiations, I think China, the sense I get, is wanting to hang tough and wants to see how far the Trump administration will take this battle to. I've heard nothing from President Xi which seems to suggest that they are willing to capitulate to the demands which the US has imposed on China of these unprecedented more than 100% tariffs.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's not just, of course, China who is seeing these unprecedented tariffs. Up to 60 countries, as we know, facing 11 to 50% tariffs. And in response, we've heard that countries have been contacting the US. The White House has said that over 70 countries have reached out to the president seeking tariff deals. In fact, many reports suggest that it's not just foreign leaders who have been dialing up Trump, but chief executives of some of the largest multinational companies have also reached out to him. Meanwhile, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt has said that calls to the US president have been off the hook, but Trump will only make deals with these countries if they benefit American workers. Let's listen in.
Good afternoon, everybody. How are we? In total, since the Liberation Day announcement, nearly 70 countries have already reached out to the president to begin a negotiation. Countries are falling over themselves to reform their unfair trade practices and free open their markets to our country.
While countries hope for a concession on tariffs, some of the possible actions that countries are likely to take as a deal with the United States include securing the freedom of Americans wrongfully detained abroad, committing to working with US artificial intelligence companies, buying more US energy, or combating global drug trafficking. Well, Asian markets are in free fall this morning, reacting to US President Donald Trump's latest move to slap 104% tariffs on Chinese goods. Hong Kong's Hang Seng plunged over 3% at opening. Shanghai stocks were also sharply lower. Taiwan's market dropped nearly 2%, even after the government announced a $15 billion rescue fund. Japan's Nikkei slid just over 3%, wiping out Tuesday's gains. South Korea's won fell to its weakest level since 2009. Trump's sweeping 10% tariffs took effect over the weekend. Now higher rates for dozens of economies kicked in just after midnight. The US originally added a 34% tariff on Chinese goods, but after Beijing matched it, Trump signed off on another 50%, taking the total to a huge 104%. Markets briefly rebounded this week on hopes of a deal, but optimism faded as Trump pushed forward. On Wall Street, the S&P 500 tumbled again, closing below 5,000 for the first time in nearly a year. Oil has also dropped below $60 a barrel, and in Europe, the EU is now preparing its own retaliation, possibly as early as next week. Well, joining us to discuss these developments is Andrew KP Leung, a Chinese strategist, joining us from Hong Kong. Andrew, I would like to get your response now to these markets that we've seen in trading in Asia. How do you think this 104% tariff on China will impact not just Asian markets, but also the global economy?
Well, I think
we seem to have lost Andrew, so I will bring back in Arvind Mahajan. Arvind, looking at these stocks, we've just spoken there about the decrease that we've seen. Stocks across the board dropping 1, 2, 3, even 4% in the case of oil as well. Is this a trend you think will continue given the stepping up of tariffs we're seeing from Donald Trump's administration?
Well, that is very hard to predict. Having researched financial markets for 45 years, one thing I've learned is never to predict financial markets. They have a dynamics of their own, and they really depend upon what information emerges as we move forward. So at this juncture, it is really unclear where the market's going to be. Now, if I really have to conjecture, I would say that the markets already have dropped significantly. S&P is below 5,000. From 6,100, which it was at one time. So the probability of it going down further diminishes compared to it moving up. But it's certainly not clear that the markets really have bottomed out. I would say, however, that markets are capricious, but they are resilient, and they can turn around very quickly as well. Markets are simply reacting to the information they are getting and how they are interpreting the information. And at this juncture, the information which is coming, the sentiment is quite negative, rightfully so, but the market really still is waiting to ascertain where things are going to go from now. So right now we are in the middle of the game. The game is not done. We are waiting for, as the White House said, there were 70 countries which have contacted the United States. They do want to negotiate with the tariffs because the US market is so big that their economies are going to be hurt very badly. But we don't know how China is going to react. We don't know how other countries are going to react. So we are in a period where things are in flux. Information is emerging, the market is trying to digest this information. A lot of information which is coming is not reassuring, and therefore the markets are going down. However, we don't know if the game completely is over yet and the market has bottomed out completely yet. But I will tell you that seasoned investors, while the markets are full of fear right now, we have this VIX index which measures the market sentiment, and for the first time it has exceeded a value of 50. So there's a lot of fear in the market. But I do want to tell you that seasoned investors have seen the markets go down and they have seen the markets go back up as well. So this is not the end of the world as far as financial markets go. The question really is, how is the rest of the world going to react to the president's unprecedented tariffs on these countries, and how the US is going to respond to that? And we just don't know that. We don't have that information at this point.
Yes, Arvind, to bring an end to this discussion on the tariffs which are shocking the global economics, I want to bring it back to the real life implications. Of course, markets going up and down. There are economists who, of course, are deeply involved in this. But for the average person living an average life, what does a market crash like the one that we've seen over the past couple of weeks since Trump's tariff announcements, what's the real life impact on everyday people going about their lives?
Twofold things. One, for a lot of people, they see their what we call values of going down.
We seem to have lost Arvind there, but of course the trade conflict, the impending trade war that seems to be looming, will be something we continue to cover as Trump's tariffs, not just on China, but across the world, come into force. But we do now move on, and a devastating tragedy in Santo Domingo has occurred when the roof of the iconic Jet Set nightclub collapsed during a merengue concert, claiming at least 98 lives and injuring 160 others. Among the victims were notable figures such as Nelsie Cruz, the sister of Major League Baseball star Nelson Cruz, and former MLB pitcher Octavio Dotel. Rescue teams have been working around the clock to find survivors in the rubble. The collapse occurred around midnight during a performance by merengue singer Ruby Perez, who remains unaccounted for. Authorities are investigating the cause, though details on the building's last inspection remain unclear. President Luis Abinadar has expressed his condolences as crowds gathered outside the nightclub, anxiously waiting for news of their loved ones. Rescue operations continue as families hold on to hope. Here is what the victims' family members have said.
Hay gente que está en la clínica y no la han identificado. Nosotros vamos para allá. Hay un video que sale donde ella está saliendo. Y me dice que hay gente que está en el baño, también atrapado, pero yo sé que ella está bien, yo tengo fe.
Tenemos aquí unas amistades, sobrinas, primas, unos amigas y amigos que estaban en los escombros, porque aún no están en la lista ni de trasladados al hospital ni de fallecidos. Y esperamos por ellos,
Moving on, and South Korea has unveiled a $2 billion emergency support package for its auto industry, warning that US President Donald Trump's new 25% tariffs on foreign-made cars could deal a significant blow to its economy. The move comes as Washington's sweeping tariffs on global trading partners take effect, targeting South Korea's top export sector of automobiles and auto parts. The industry totaled nearly $43 billion in US sales last year. Here is what the South Korean finance minister has said.
오늘은 최근 관세 영향으로 우려가 큰 자동차 산업에 대한 긴급 대응 방안을 논의합니다. 먼저 부품 기업 등 관세 피해 기업을 긴급
Well, Seoul's support plan includes expanded low-cost financing, tax deferrals and an EV subsidy scheme tied to manufacturers' discounts. Hyundai Motor will also launch a separate 1 trillion won fund to support domestic firms. Meanwhile, President Trump is touting a great call with acting Korean President Han Duck-soo, claiming negotiations are underway as Seoul's top team heads to Washington. Here is what he said.
We're doing very well in making, I call them tailored deals, not off the rack. These are tailored, highly tailored deals. Right now, Japan is flying here to make a deal. South Korea is flying here to make a deal, and others are flying here.
All of this comes as South Korea's currency tumbles to its lowest level since 2009, hitting 1,487.45 won to the US dollar. This leads to fueling concerns of a deeper economic fallout from the escalating global trade tensions. Well, that is all that we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more of the latest international news from around the world.